opened his restaurant just 2 months.
This is an NBC News special report. Here's Chris Jansing.
Good day. We're coming on the air with breaking news. President Biden making his first public statement on camera about the leak of the Supreme Court's draft opinion on the Mississippi abortion case, which was published by the news outlet Politico. The opinion suggests the court is poised to overturn the landmark abortion ruling on Roe versus Wade, which established abortion as a constitutional right nearly 50 years ago. It is important to note that this is a draft opinion and the justices may change their votes. Let's listen.
It's the main reason why I worked so hard to keep Robert Bork off the court. It reflects his view almost work. Anyway, look, the idea that it concerns me a great deal that we're going to, after 50 years, decide a woman does not have a right to choose within the limits of the Supreme Court decision in Casey, number one. But even more, equally as profound is the rationale used. Right. And it would mean that every other decision relating to the notion of privacy is thrown into question. I realize this goes back a long way, but one of the debates I had with Robert Bork was whether Griswold versus Connecticut should stand as law. The state of Connecticut said that the privacy of your bedroom, a husband and wife or a couple could not choose to use contraception. To use a contraception was a violation of the law. If the rationale of the decision as released were to be sustained, a whole range of rights are in question. A whole range of rights. And the idea we're letting the states make those decisions, localities make those decisions, would be a fundamental shift in what we've done. So it goes far beyond, in my view, if it becomes a law and if what is written is what remains. It goes far beyond the concern of whether or not there is the right to choose. It goes to other basic rights, the right to marry, the right to determine a whole range of things. Because one of the issues that this court, many of the members of the court, a number of the members of the court, have not acknowledged is that there is a right to privacy in our Constitution. I strongly believe there is. I think the decision in Griswold was correct overruling it. I think the decision in Roe was correct because there's a right to privacy. There can be limitations on it, but it cannot be denied.
Do you think that this leak has irreparably changed the court? Do you think that this leak has irreparably changed the court? We've never seen this happen before.
Well, you know, if this decision holds, it's really quite a radical decision. And again, the underlying premise, and again, I've not had a chance to thoroughly go into the report, the decision. But it basically says all the decisions relating to your private life, who you marry, whether or not you decide to conceive a child or not, whether or not you can have an abortion, a range of other decisions, whether or not how you raise your child. What does this do? And does this mean that in Florida they can decide they're going to pass a law saying that same-sex marriage is not permissible? It's against the law in Florida? So there's a whole, it's a fundamental shift in American jurisprudence.
On the filibuster, the President do away with the filibuster to codify Roe?
I'm not prepared to make those judgments now about, but you know, I think the codification of Roe makes a lot of sense. Look, think what Roe says. Roe says what all basic mainstream religions have historically concluded, that the existence of a human life and being is a question. Is it at the moment of conception? Is it 6 months? Is it 6 weeks? Is it quickening, like Aquinas argued? I mean, so the idea that we're going to make a judgment that is going to say that no one can make the judgment to choose to abort a child based on a decision by the Supreme Court, I think goes way overboard.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
What does this mean for the midterms? What does this mean for the Democrats' argument in the midterms?
I haven't thought that through yet.
Do changes need to be made to the court in light of this if this decision holds?
I beg your pardon?
Do changes need to be made to the court in light of this? If this
No, we just have to choose it. I mean, look, one of the reasons why I voted against a number of the members in the court, they refused to acknowledge that there's a Ninth Amendment. They refused to acknowledge there's a right to privacy. I mean, there's so many fundamental rights that are affected by that, and I'm not prepared to leave that to the whims and the public at the moment in local areas. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Come on, guys.
President Biden, who has said that if this holds, this draft opinion that was found by Politico would be a radical decision. Let's go right to NBC Chief White House Correspondent Kristen Welker. We heard it there, and it's been so that his administration has fought hard for Roe v. Wade. So now that it looks like this decision is going to come down, what's the next step for this administration?
Well, that's the big question, Chris. What you basically heard from President Biden there was his reaffirmation of his support for Roe v. Wade, his concerns about what this ruling, if it does in fact come to pass, could mean for other rulings that have protected people's right to privacy, their right to decide who they marry, whether or not they take birth control, for example. So what happens now? Well, this is what he said in a statement earlier today. At the federal level, we will need more pro-choice senators and a pro-choice majority in the House to adopt legislation that codifies Roe, which I will work to pass and sign into law. I think what you are going to see, Chris, is an intensifying effort to try to get that legislation through Congress. There has been a piece of legislation that passed the House that would codify Roe into law, but there aren't the votes in the Senate, and it's not clear, and it doesn't seem as though there will be unless the filibuster were to be overturned, and there aren't the votes to do that right now. So this really is going to become a major flashpoint, a political issue on the campaign trail with the midterms looming. And the big question, Chris, is with Democrats bracing for big losses, could they use this issue to really try to energize key voters? Could Republicans use this issue to try to build on the momentum that they have heading into the midterms? I think that's what we'll be watching for. What are the people saying about this, Chris? Well, according to the latest NBC News poll, 54% of Americans say abortion should remain legal. Chris.
Well, let's bring in NBC Justice Correspondent Pete Williams. And Pete, I understand that the court just put out a statement.
Yes, last night the court had no comment on this Politico story, but now the court says that the draft opinion that Politico published is authentic, although they say, you know, this still isn't, we're still not done here. But let me read the key part of this, which is what Chief Justice John Roberts says. He says, first of all, he has directed the court's marshal to launch an investigation. He says, to the extent that the betrayal of the confidences of the court, I'm reading that sort of middle paragraph right now, was intended to undermine the integrity of our operations, it won't succeed. The work of the court won't be affected in any way. And then he goes on to call this a singular and egregious breach of the trust that is an affront to the court of the community of public service who work here. So the court has taken this very unusual step in the midst, in the wake of this extremely unusual leak, to say it is the real thing and it's going to be investigated.
And one of the questions that's been raised by this is, because it's out there now, and of course it's been confirmed that this is a real draft opinion, could it move up the timeline? When are we expecting to hear a decision here, and then what happens in the states?
Right. So could it change the timeline? Maybe. I don't know. But I could argue that it could push it back, too. It could complicate the efforts to get this decision out there. Some are saying it should speed it up. Normally, we wouldn't expect to see the final decision from the court until late June, when the court term ends. The case was argued in December. This draft is dated February 10th, and it's just the beginning. And so what happens inside the court is the majority opinion is written. It's circulated to the minority. The dissenters write what they want to say. It goes back and forth, and there are a lot of changes that happen in that. Now, could it be that one of those changes is a justice changing their view, and the court goes the other way? I suppose in theory, yes, although the odds of that, I think, are extremely remote. I think when the 9 justices came into the courtroom on December 1st to hear this case, they all knew exactly how they were going to vote. And one other thing I'd say about this, Chris, is this is an astonishing change for the court to have something like this, a fully written draft opinion leaked out. That has never happened. But nobody should be surprised by the conclusion. It was obvious on December 1st when this case was argued that there were 5 votes on the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade. So we should all be shocked that this has happened, but not by what it says.
Pete, briefly, do we usually know how much a draft then gets revised and how often what seems like a vote that's there and ready to go actually changes?
Every term, there are 3 or 4 cases where the votes change. Now, we know this because this is what court insiders have told us, but we don't see draft opinions. The only opinions we ever see are the final ones. And sometimes even in a justice's papers, you don't see this level of detail of the back and forth when their papers are finally turned over to the Library of Congress and made public. So we don't ever see this kind of detail. But yes, there have been cases where justices changed their minds, that the writing of the dissent and the majority opinion causes someone to have second thoughts and think, maybe I'm going to vote the other way. It just seems very unlikely that this would be such a case.
Let's go to NBC Washington correspondent Yamiche Alcindor, who is outside the Jackson Women's Health Organization in Mississippi, which was at the center of this case. Look, we heard the president being asked the impact this might have on the midterms. Obviously, control of the Senate and the House, both at stake here. Is it fair to say that both sides believe this could energize their base?
I think it is fair to say that, Chris, and I've been outside, as you noted, the Jackson Women's Health Organization all morning. Women here are still getting abortions. This is a fully operational clinic. Roe v. Wade is still the law of the land for now. But the ACLU of Mississippi points out that if this draft that has now been authenticated by the Supreme Court, when it becomes the opinion of the court, if Roe v. Wade is overturned, this abortion clinic would have to stop. And that would mean the women in the region and the women in this state would not be able to access abortion. We're looking at a couple of different organizations that have been tracking this information, and the idea is that women in this region, they wouldn't be able to travel to states like Louisiana or Alabama or Tennessee, bordering states, because they would all, like some 26 other states, have laws or constitutional amendments or lawmakers that are likely to overturn, to ban abortion or to severely restrict it. When it comes to the midterms, that is the question, whether or not that is going to energize liberals or energize conservatives. I've been talking to both sides of the aisle here outside of this clinic. I should tell you, I talked to one protester who's been here for decades. He is feeling good, of course, about this decision, saying that he is, of course, an opponent of abortion rights, but he also tells me that he's already looking onto the horizon. I said, well, what if this abortion clinic closes? What are you going to do next? And he said, I'm going to turn my attention to same-sex marriage. I'm going to make sure that that is the next thing that the Supreme Court tries to knock down. And I should tell you, the ACLU of Mississippi told me they are also looking at that issue and saying, if Roe v. Wade can be overturned, what other sorts of rights can be overturned? That idea of both sides looking at the horizon could be the big impact. It could make a big impact on the midterms, with voters on both sides possibly being energized, though it's no telling which side would be the one that would be more angry or more energized to go to the polls.
But exactly what the president alluded to, which there could be a domino effect. What other rights might be affected? Thank you so much, Yamiche. That does conclude our coverage. We'll have much more tonight on NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt. You can catch updates throughout the day on MSNBC or on our streaming service, NBC News Now. For all of us here at NBC News, I'm Chris Jansing in New York. Good day.